just heard. So we've talked about special forces in the military, we've talked about women in schools, we've talked about a vast range of things. Just before I came out here, Lee asked me, he said he'd heard that Team Teach came from control and restraint. Could that be true? And so we'll line that one in as well. I'm going to do a potted history, as I am so old. I'm going to go through right back. Everyone else has started off by saying this is about me, so this is about me. My history, I started off in this area actually, in a splendid building like this. It was called the Royal Earlswood Asylum for Idiots and Mental Defectives. I felt very at home there. And they didn't mess around with the terminology in those days, did they? And it makes you think just how far we've come back and how far things have changed. It was a splendid, great institution like this. I'll start off with institutes I've been involved with. The old Build, the Build accreditation scheme. I was involved with this in the 1970s. The 70s was in the hospital, and then as a head teacher, I was involved with Build in the 1990s. Worked with them, I worked for them briefly in 2000-ish, 2001-2, and then I was accredited by Build, so they were accrediting me at that time. Another institute, I'm a certified member of the Expert Witness Institute. Most of my work now is legal stuff, advising, and most of it is cases where people have been hurt. And you can learn an awful lot about what's going on the ground from court cases. And I think we should look out for what I'll call perverse incentives, because a real trend that I'm worried about is the number of cases where employers have, under the guise of restraint reduction, which is what we're all involved in trying to stop the bad guys doing the wrong things, have come up with schemes like saying we're going to stop people using restraint in our social care settings, and we'll get the police to do it. And then they'll say, and we also now, the staffing levels that we had previously aren't necessary, because they were really necessary for the times when there were big incidents. So it will reduce training costs and staffing costs, and what we've got is a huge increase in people being injured. And in fact, I was working with the Varn Group in Manchester about a year ago with a presentation for the Health and Safety Executive, who were just getting the feedback from social care on what's the impact been of all the work we've done over the last 5 years. And they just made social care a critical risk area due to the high number of violence, work-related violence incidents. And I think, really, we've looked this morning at horrendous examples of abuse. I've been involved in investigations too, both from the journalistic side, actually with young people, putting mics and stuff on them, because they need training too. And I've often wondered, why is it that all this regulation and accreditation is so ineffective at finding who the bad people are? Someone mentioned earlier today that Winterbourne View had plenty of accredited training. Not many people talk about Cedar Vale, a hospital also owned by the same people in 2006, where a patient died. And if you look at what actually happened there, they told people not to use certain sorts of restraint, but they didn't tell them what to do. And what do you do with a client who's got a risk assessment that says that previously they dragged people to the ground? You get dragged to the ground, and just watch what any human does from the age of 3 or 4 onwards if they're not trained, and they get on top of people. Watch kids in playgrounds all clambering on top. Watch what police officers do under stress. They get on top of people, and this is where position of it. It's not the position so much. It's having a lot of people wait on top of you. So I've been always reluctant to quick and easy fix answers, and I'm more so the more involved in the case at the moment. Oh, by the way, just last one there. ICM, I'm director of the Institute of Conflict Management, another institute, and I'm also director of Power Learning, which is the company that bought Team Teach. And the link between these is Team Teach did evolve from control and restraint, and I'll tell you about the story. I'll tell you about Royal Earlswood. In the 1980s, I was head of an upper school in a school for people with learning difficulties. It had people up to the age of 21, so these were bigger people. I had no training. any training at the hospital either. I turned up on one day and I was told, this is Derek and he'll show you the ropes. And off we went up to the corridors. Actually, it was fine. I thought the patients were very fun. But in the 80s, prison officers didn't have training. People don't believe this when you tell them. All over the place. We talked about rules of engagement. Let's pull that in. Where did rules of engagement come from? Who was it who developed? It came in the 80s with someone who had some military background. And in Northern Ireland, we couldn't shoot people. That's the whole point. They had to have a new sort of way. It was dealing with people on the streets of Northern Ireland like you would deal with them in hospitals and other places. And it was Aidan Healy, who I knew, who actually was the head of the philanthropic school, which was about a mile from where I was living, although I didn't know at that time. And it was at the time when approved schools had been shut down. And overnight, people were told you couldn't use corporal punishment, you couldn't use restraint. There was a lot of panic from the staff. And he simply said, we are going to stop it, I will train you so that you can manage dangerous behaviour. And you can call me at any time of the day or night, and I'll come in. But we are not going to be treating the kids like you've been treating them. He was brought in. Links to the government. You were with the government. If you know that our defence minister is John Healy, Aidan Healy was John's dad. And I worked with him in the 90s, bringing control and restraint into other services, children's services, as it happened, because I was a head teacher in the 90s. That was C&R initially being introduced into secure hospitals. That's where I met Terry Healy, and the residential care and specialist schools. Aidan himself regretted the way that it was moved. The injuries reduced so much in the prison service when they introduced control and restraint. The government got really excited about it and said we need to get it everywhere. And Aidan said the reason it worked well in Wakefield Prison, which is where he developed it, was because he worked with prison officers who knew prisoners and they knew the corridors and they knew the staff and people with technical ability. And this again built it into your bit. Aidan was an SAS major in the Second World War. He never told me that. All the evenings I went drinking with him, he told me funny stories about the army, never mentioned that he was an SAS major. So, a different person. So in the 90s, I got involved in a bit of policy work with the NHT2, because my schools tended to work. The British Institute of Learning Disabilities Bill was campaigning against the use of C&R for good reason, that the techniques shouldn't have been just transferred over. They wanted to develop a better version, in the same way that I wanted to develop children's services in a different way, which is the way I know. In 2000, a lot happened around that time with the new Labour government. We got the Institute of Conflict Management, was established with the support of Health and Safety Exec, to develop a curriculum for the Security Industry Association, so it was a link there too. It was also involved in the prevention and management of work-related violence standards, which I'm paying more attention to now, I think, with these court cases. And the first bill of accreditations even came in 2002. This was my first formal link with Bill. I wrote a paper that was published in 1998, and it was saying that we shouldn't go down the route of having one set of standards imposed on all sectors, because if it's drawn up by people with experience in one sector, it may not apply in the others. You've got to get all of them together like this and get panels that are well balanced and developed. I think there are so many common themes. We could have a set of general principles that work, as you've said, in the army and in schools and in hospitals, but when it gets to the detail of the setting, it's got to be contextual for that particular setting. And that's what my paper was all about. I had a little bit of clout by then because I'd started writing books. The Children Act Up was about applying the Children Act to children's services, but keeping people safe too. Some people thought the Children Act meant you couldn't tell children what to do anymore. Someone idiot came to my school and said that you could no longer expect children to stay in class because that was restriction of liberty. And I was saying, you're going to have chaos if you try to run your life like that now. I did Holding Back in 1996, was a video training pack on physical restraint. This was way before I was involved in teach. I was asked to write a course for the Birmingham University med course lecture there. So I had a bit of clout when it came to the government and was pushing them towards developing specific guidance for schools. I was a trustee of the National Control and Restraint General Services Association by then too. So at the bottom of my own paper, obviously I read it, I never noticed this letter. And I really should have done, because it was a letter from John Harris, the chief exec, saying they'd been funded to create an accreditation scheme. And maybe the reason I didn't pay attention to it, it said it was for learning disability and autism, that wasn't my field, and they said they only wanted to hear from people with experience in that area. So I missed it completely. But I made a mistake in doing that, because later on there was a lot of pressure from people who were saying, these are the experts in all forms of physical intervention, and this is what you need to put into your school. And I tried some of the techniques, and they didn't work. A lot of the other stuff, the person that was coming at the time, this was way before what we're talking about now, was promoting ProAct Skip as a set of techniques that could work in all settings. And I tried them, and they were, in my opinion, not safe or effective. So I was arguing against that idea of just trying to impose one size fits all. And I thought the argument was won. In 2008, when the policy framework for the build scheme was redone, they said we've resisted the temptation to produce a policy framework that applies to all the different agencies and service groups. And I thought that was great. Learning disability and autism define our sphere of competence, and different areas would divide their own. So, by 2008, we had the Care Quality Commission who just come in and they were regulating social care. We had GSA in health, we had the build scheme, we had leadership conflict management, SIA had come in the early 2000s, we had Ofsted in schools. So why did we need another accreditation scheme after that? And the answer is, I'm not sure we did. But a good quote from Charlie Mungo, who was the assistant for Berkshire Hathaway. He said, whenever you're looking at a situation, show me the incentive and I'll tell you what the outcome is. And this is about conflicts of interest at the subconscious. When there's a lot of research done on the medical field where they surveyed doctors and asked them whether they were ever influenced by the presents they got from drug companies and the holidays they had when they have conferences in Davos, and where are we here? And they said no. We said it's all very nice, but we're not influenced by them at all. But then they did some statistical work and looked at the correlation between the advertising budget spends in different areas and what the drugs prescribed were, and they found it overlapped perfectly. These aren't bad people, they're not corrupt. All humans are influenced by their incentives, but they don't know they're being influenced. It's why it's so important to be careful about incentives in this. 2016, Michael Gove was the Justice Secretary at the time. Charlie Taylor was the Behaviour Czar. He's now the HM Inspector of Prisons. And I've known Charlie for a long time. Michael Gove asked if I get involved in investigation into abuse allegations in the training centres. And as part of it, I was given a lot of stuff to look after. I went up and trained in some different models again, which I always like doing. And I came across this review of restraint systems, which had been conducted after the death of Gareth Myatt in 2004. A tragic death, which needn't have happened, complete overreaction. We've heard, I don't need to reiterate, we've heard all the examples of how these things go wrong, there's common themes in all of them. But they were looking at all the training that was being offered in the secure children's sectors, and they were going through it, giving judgments on it. And the bill didn't come out very well in this. The bill representative acknowledged that the process wasn't accreditation in true sense of the word, and it was more a compliance with the code of practice exercise. And this is really where the need for something new came from, because it wasn't just improving what we'd already got, which could have been done, it sort of needed a bit of a rebrand, I think. I'd taken my eye off the ball on this, and to be honest with you, I was thinking about retirement at this stage. My publication company was going to be moved over into teaching, to be sold to venture capitalists. I had to stay for 18 months, that's the game, and then I could go and do playing. I've got plenty of plans to go playing. this hit me, I knew nothing about it. In March 2019, I was contacted by the NHT, and they were saying, what the F is going on here, and why haven't you told us about this? And they'd heard rumours that Build RRM training was about to be made mandatory for all services from April. Now, I may have contributed slightly to this, because after my involvement in 2014 in the bit about the build, old style build, I did say to George Matthews, who by then had the largest trading company in education at the time, why are we paying, if this accreditation isn't a real accreditation, and over 15 years of paying quite a lot of money, Haley mentioned about the importance of monitoring that they do now, but actually, not one course had ever been watched. There was absolutely no monitoring going on. It really wasn't the speed that we've got now. I was saying, why are we paying for this? I said, you're big enough now to be a responsible body of professional opinion in legal terms, and look for something better. And that's when Team Teach moved to the ICM. But when people were told that this new scheme was going to be introduced, and that by law everybody had to be part of it by next April, this meant that a whole bunch of good trainers were going to be out of business because they couldn't do this. And I was saying, I know nothing about this. So I began to find out. So it wasn't really, it was supposedly completely new and different, but it wasn't, because everybody in the old build scheme was just moved into the new one. Whereas it was going to take more than a year for anyone outside the scheme to become accredited, which meant you'd have a huge commercial advantage, because these people would be out of business for at least a year. And I thought, this is corrupt, we can't do this. But it took a little bit of, people actually didn't believe me when I said, this is what people are saying. And when I talked to officials, they said, no, that's not true. So I was a bit muddled. Anyway, I looked into it. I talked to the NHT, I briefed the NHT. They asked me to brief the National SEND Forum. There's a National Special Educational Needs and Disability Forum. It's a big group, 13, 14 organisations meet every month. And they met with a Department of the Education official. So I briefed them and told them this was going on. They were not pleased at all. But because the Department of Education official was there, I think the messages got back to the department. Because I was then contacted on the quiet by moles that I know in the department who were saying, we're not at all happy with what we're hearing about this. And we were sort of, all of us in the dark. We were all trying to work out who knows what the heck's going on here. And I also met Bill, because Ben Higgins, who's the CEO of Bill, came to do a briefing for the National SEND Forum, and he made a lot of mistakes in the briefing, which I'm quite assertive, because I'm not really want to pocket it. I picked him up on the problems. He was charming, but at the end of it, he came over to me and thanked me, and he said, we should meet up and we should work together. I thought, that's actually how we ought to do to work together. So I had a meeting with him on the 7th of June, Friday the 7th of June. It was a busy time for me because I was on the way out to a conference in New York at the time. But I misunderstood again, because I misunderstood the purpose of us meeting. We met in a cafe in London. He told me that the trustees of Build had had a meeting and they had the funds to take me through the courts for libel unless I shut up. And they were minded to do it. I thought, that's not what I was expecting. But I'd had a good year actually, so I wasn't too fussed about the financial bit. This came back to me, what I should have done, and somebody talked about blowing whistle, I should have blown the whistle at that.
Yeah.
Because in 2002, I was a whistleblower at Build, because I observed some sharp practice, which was about conflicts of interest. I wrote to the chair of Build, asking that to be dealt with. Was told he spoke to the people concerned, and they denied it, so that was that. So I wasn't satisfied with that, so I resigned. I got contacted the department, I went to them, and then there was a lot of smoothing over. I was asked to come back. The situation was righted, and I was asked to work with Bill, the Bureau of Built with Marion Corwick, to help us bring the children's section together. But that's I've got to declare an interest here, that I've got a bit of history of what is going back some time. And new guidance was coming out in 2019. And the department got rattled and phoned me up on the quiet and were asking, can I read you bits? They weren't allowed to tell me what the guidance was, but they phoned up and read some bits. And it was saying that all schools training would have to be build training in medicine. And I said, that's not lawful, and you're going to get an enormous. Now, if you think where the government was at this time, they didn't want the political sting. I was saying, you need to go tell your minister the trouble they're in, because this is going to get the teachers aren't going to like this. So we had a bit of a panic. And strangely enough, on my way to New York the following week, 2 weeks before the guidance was issued, I was dictating a section to them, which was to try and correct the errors that were in there that would have completely put a load of people out of business. The bit I got in was the top line there. I got in that other accredited bodies have expressed an interest in providing certificates to accreditation schemes through universities, that Eric Baskin was working to try and make that happen. I said the Institute of Conflict Management developed a quality award scheme with the help of the Health and Safety Executive, and that was an alternative. What we need is a market in accreditation, because markets tend to bring down costs and improve quality. Monopolies and cartels do the opposite. And I was happy to have that in. The bit that said when commissioning training, settings and services are advised to consider UCAS, I thought that made sense. I didn't actually know what UCAS was. I don't think any did either, which is how much work it is. It's an enormous amount of work to get through UCAS. I thought this would just be like a list, that those could be put on a list, the sort of reputable people doing it, and a whole bunch of other people would, how wrong I was. So, other accredited bodies, the guidance does say, this is the 2019 guidance, it simply says settings and services are advised to consider. Now that's not the same as saying it's mandatory or demanded by force. But as a matter of fact, there is no such thing as UCAS accredited training. It's another job considering it. It's the certificating body that's accredited, and you get certificated by an accredited body. So what is accreditation, certification? This is what the UCAS website. They're different. Accreditation is about competence and impartiality. Impartiality is important here, and it's very specific. And the scope of the specific activities you're accredited for is on the form. It's out there. And look what the example it gives is. The specificity is so clear. If you're accredited to test saliva swabs for COVID-19, you can't test saliva swabs for anything else, and you can't test anything else for COVID-19. It's specifically for that, and that applies to training too. So just being accredited to train in one sector doesn't mean you can expand that or change that to other things. The whole point of accreditation, and there are 90 accreditation bodies, none of them really in this area, apart from where we are currently. That's ACTS. It's mental health conditions, dementia, learning disability, autistic people, and it's against the RN standards, that's fine. I thought, well, this is good, but ICM needs to do the same thing, so we need to get Bill. How hard could that be? And the answer was unbelievably hard. I just came up against brick wall after brick wall from different governments. Initially they said fine, then they said no, you're not allowed, no one else is going to be allowed to do training in this area apart from Bill. I'm saying that, who says? And they said it's the law. I'm saying what law? The problem is, I thought I'd get this done in a month, but I said I'd do it for nothing for the ICM. That's buggered me up because it's taken more than a year to sort this out. Every time, and the problem was that there was definitely a resistance, because every time I sent an email asking to clarify what law, what guidance, what statute, they didn't return my emails for months. I'd send follow-up emails saying, I sent you an email a month ago, where are you? about 2 months later, I get this huge apology how hard everyone was working. And then it'd say something else, with another reference to this act. And that was wrong too. And I'd send that back and then radio silence. I realised there's something funny going on here. The messages I was getting were these: that the standards were going to apply in every setting, that CQC expected all training to be delivered by build group organisations. I was saying, where is this all coming from? Well, the thing about this was, I was getting this, I've got archived loads of, I always archive websites when I'm involved in legal cases, because I've been stung before when I wrote a report exposing an expert who was being over-exaggerating their background, and then 2 days later their website's taken down. They deny it was ever up there. So I always take screenshots of websites, archives of websites. I was getting the same quotes from different official organisations, from the department and from UCAS itself. Where was it all coming from? One of them was that there was a use of force statutory guidance that said this. Well, use of force statutory guidance sounds like it applies to everyone. There was Mental Health Use of Force Act 2018 quoted that. There was Mental Health Act Use of Force statutory guidance 2018 quoted. CQC Regulation 18 was the one the CQC were going to use. All very impressive, except they were all fabricated. That doesn't exist, that doesn't exist, that doesn't exist, that doesn't exist. So where was this all coming from? Remember John Munger. This is ACT's website, not now. This was a fortnight ago. If I look at what you need to know about certificated training, the use of force statutory guidance doesn't exist. It gives the impression that all training in all areas need to be covered by this. What about CQC inspectors? They expect all services, they expect to have certificated training. Well, I've spoken to them and they said they didn't. But what's the guidance here? Regulation 18? What are we talking about? Let's have a look. This is Restraint Reduction Network's current website. I was just on there, in the corner there, checking it hadn't changed. One of them has. Since April 2020, it's been a statutory requirement. The Mental Use of Force Act statutory guidance doesn't exist. What's this about failure to do so is like to do a breach of CQC Regulation 18 relating to staff training doesn't exist. There is something like it. If you just got one word wrong, I'd say that's a slip up. But when it's carefully crafted language that is always giving the same false impression, I'm saying there's something more going on. Let's clarify this. There is a Mental Health Units Act, Mental Health Units Use of Force Act 2018. That is correct, and that's what's on the website, Haley's website now. There is, it only applies to organisations running inpatient mental health units, though, which isn't the impression that everyone got in the education sector. There is a Health and Social Care Act, obviously, everybody knows that. But it simply says you've got to have enough competent and trained staff. It makes no reference to the sort of training accreditation. So having got that sorted out, after a year and a bit, I took a breath and we're sort of on the route. We're now okay with UCAS, and we're going for UCAS accreditation. So at least we'll have some competition in the market. The ICM's standards have been approved, and we are going to work to those standards. We set up the ICM ultra-ages, that just means beyond protection, beyond the shield. I'd love to tell you it's meant to do that. I was going to call it UCAS approved, and I was told I couldn't use that. And I thought, oh bugger, I've already done the company, so I have to go searching for something that fitted the UA. So I sort of crowbar that in. And the next bit is we need to get UCAS accreditation, you've actually got to go through it. It's quite rigorous, as Haley said, and it takes a year of monitoring. You need people to monitor, which I guess is where I'm coming from here. The ICM scheme the ICM is the owner of the scheme and the standards, and it's a certificated body, separate legal entity, as Haley said. This has nothing to do with the can't be quite have the same people writing the standards and then certificating it, and sometimes actually competing in the markets, selling products to compete with the people they're certificating. That is a conflict of interest. So there's no exclusive or hidden commercial agreements. And I'd just like to pick up on that, because when we said earlier on, it's possible for someone else to come and certificate against the RRN standards. It is, but it's incredibly expensive. They want 20% of your profits, which is why nobody has been able to come forward and do that in 5 years. Let's just think about that. Although it is technically true that the RRN and Build and ACT are separate companies, they are all part of the same group, and they file their accounts as one group. So within those groups, they've got their separate bits, but within the Build group, ACT gives money to the RRN, but that's not quite the same with someone outside, because their money is going into the Build group, whereas we're moving around money in the Build group. You'll say that's not true, the panel we're looking at. Monopolies and cartels reduce quality and increase costs. So what we need is a marketing list, different people doing different stuff. And that's basically where we are now. And I'm just hoping that this last hurdle will be overcome, and then I can get out of it and actually retire. So, Gareth, thank you for inviting me to this, because it's been a really good day today, and that's